they can't do anything about it.
Exactly.
That's the kind of scenarios that, could happen.
It's interesting to think that people have been trying to explain natural disasters forever, and we have different ways of doing it. Some people attribute supernatural effects. Some people attribute the downfall of a tribe, a country, civilization due to their corruption. We're just trying to make sense of this world that we live in, which is interesting because then it lends itself to other civilizations which have been lost that we know of. So, for example, a place that I know that Doug is interested in is Göbekli Tepe. Here is a location that has been buried for 10,000. How long?
Oh yes,
multiple thousand years.
Yeah, definitely.
Buried underground, a complete temple structure, astrologically aligned, really complex, really detailed. No one knew about it because it was covered by dirt deliberately. So again,
in an era when current thought processes were still hunter-gatherers.
Yeah.
There's no concept of structured society, no concept of the tooling that they would require to create those structures. So that throws a twist in the historical timeline, right? But we find that all the time when they find remnants of evolution of humans. They continually push that timeline back all the time. I don't think I've ever seen it getting pulled forward. I've never seen it being pulled forward. It always gets pushed back.
Always going backwards, yep.
Because it's, to find, and I think with technology and various other things, I think also as well as, I'm not a historian, but I think they're starting to, as the new generation come through, maybe they're starting to become a little bit more open to those ideas and looking at different avenues and stuff like that. But yeah, that's an example of civilization popping up in a timeline that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So, Ondrej, I'm not sure if you've heard of Göbekli Tepe. It's basically where Turkey is.
Okay.
We're talking about giant stone temple structure, like really big, massive, multiple tons of stone, all carved with astrological references to constellations in the sky, potentially people potentially in ceremonial garb doing the rituals, and it has a real, definitely designed for a real strict purpose. It's not something that's been randomly put together. This has been planned thoroughly and also replicated, because basically what it looks like, they've been building these things thousands of years ago. We're talking pre-dynastic Egypt times, so like a long time. And then they've actually just buried it and then rebuilt it further down in the same area, and then I guess to correct alignment, and then burying it again, and then rebuilding. So basically just moving it on and on and on within this area. Effectively, by burying it, you're preserving it. Stone doesn't go away. It'll last forever. So what are your thoughts on the idea that not only human civilization is way older than we think it is, but that history is really up for interpretation all the way through? Like history is made up because it's all based on evidence at the time.
Definitely. But I guess as we're moving forwards, we've got tools that weren't probably available to us. The thought of, I guess, when the Royal Geographical Society became popular they didn't have that much tools. So I think still a lot of our history is still based from that time. I mean, yes, okay, we've got all this new technology about what they call like land radars, where they can, go over. They might be able to find a location that they think, okay, something's buried here. They can get the land radar to go over it, and then they can actually see the different layers, figure out, okay, something, and actually down quite deep, couple of 100 meters, where they can actually see different civilizations that they probably didn't think, maybe 100 years ago, maybe even 50 years ago, didn't think existed. And now, as they're finding more and more stuff like buried, going deeper and deeper, then history definitely turned on its head, that civilizations are there like a lot longer than what people think, because there are a lot of really old structures out there that we have pretty much to this day, I guess, no way of explaining it as well.
One thing it doesn't lie is geology. And I think there's a lot of evidence, maybe not, quite rightly, the academic community has got to scrutinise that evidence. I think that's okay. But as time goes on, there's technology, mathematical models, more data that we can pull back. And I think when they start to analyse the geological evidence, I think that really shows the timeline properly. The likes obviously Göbekli Tepe, I think it was carbon dating they did for that, didn't they? And they put it back to as well before pre-dynastic Egypt. But there's definitely, as people are looking at these things in slightly different viewpoints and different lenses, the geology of a lot of what's happened to the Earth is showing up. And even silly things like there was some footprints found in the east coast of America that dated back well before they thought, humans had roamed America. And that was just something, it was a family's footprints in this rock. So again, it's like you can't get around that. I think human civilization is definitely a lot older than we currently believe. The key thing is having the evidence to prove that, to make it more academically accepted.
And probably the willingness to actually want to do it. Because it is a way of, we have colonialized and whitewashed history in many ways.
Oh, yeah.
So to say that we were wrong is a challenge. That's probably one of the biggest things to do. Basically, to say that, hey, all our history books for the time being are technically incorrect. Everything you learned in school is wrong. Could be a shock to people. I think it's necessary. Just going back to Göbekli Tepe, it's founded in the 10th millennium BCE. So 10,000 years before Common Era. He's really, really, really old.
Yep. And
then abandoned in the 8th. So basically, to think about it, it's 8,000 years later, it's suddenly discovered again in modern times. That's just a mind-boggling thing. Again, now going back to my good friend Plato. So Plato is trying to share this idea of the virtue versus vice of society. It's funny that we're living in current times where it seems to be quite a poignant and sort of relevant thing, where politically the states, the governments on our planet now, which were first deemed to be virtuous and free and open and the land of plenty, seems to be slowly corrupting. Is history repeating itself? Are we seeing the empires of the last couple of hundred years suddenly reaching their point where the gods are going to wipe them out?
I think, humans are creatures of habit. They're power hungry, politically savvy, and I think, as Plato said, Atlanteans, essentially that's the kind of model they're in now, where they're saying that there was an elite class, they had the power, and what his philosophy was that everyone essentially should have a similar. You shouldn't have that structure, basically, and also, as I said earlier, people should be enlightened. What we're seeing now, obviously, in politics, America is probably the better example, is that populism and almost pop culture style politics, where a reality TV star becomes the president of the United States. I can't think of a better example of something that Plato did not want to happen as right now. Because obviously what he was saying was he wanted philosophers and people of that ilk to be essentially running the country.
Well, hold on. So Trump's not a philosopher?
But I think what the scary thing is, he's not listening to educated people like scientists.
Trump, come on, Trump's got to be playing devil's advocate, and I feel sick by doing this. Absolutely sick. Can someone rise to that level of power and be so ignorant? What type of world are we living in? Well,
he's not necessarily ignorant, but what he's very good at is understanding political mood at that moment in time.
You could say something about George Bush Jr. in that sense. He wasn't definitely the smartest person out there. I think he was very ignorant to how he saw the world as well. Probably not as much as Trump.
Yeah, but Bush was. It felt more like he was, advised. Where Trump seems to be very good at putting a finger on what the mood in the camp is. That's what it feels like to me.
So in other words, he's actually probably quite talented at what he does. He just isn't particularly virtuous in his agenda.
Exactly.
So we don't have a philosopher king in running America at the moment. So we effectively have a corrupted political structure, a corrupted...
That could be said for a lot of countries,
exactly,
not just America,
Well, exactly. So I'm looking at the whole world. So for those who listen to this in the future, in the current state of affairs on this planet Earth, the right wing is basically, we have more right-wing governments in power at the moment than, maybe the last 60-odd years. The fear, the hatred, the paranoia has basically spread worldwide. conservative governments are pretty much everywhere. And to me, you get the flashbacks of in Critias, because Critias himself in Plato's writing is the conservative. He is the one who's actually thinking, yeah, Atlantis was great. Those elites were fantastic. It was a shame that, this virtuous Athens took him out, because he was actually kind of quite conservative. In fact, he may have been one of the 7 tyrants of Athens. So we're talking about a political bastard. So history's repeated itself again. With now the same type of quality individual has risen to the top in America, in Australia, and so on. People who looking out for themselves and not really taking the populace and the people into consideration, really just lining their own pockets. It's interesting to think then, fast forward 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 10,000 years. Let's go back teppy distance into the future, and they're looking back at our time. If anything's left, what will they think of us? Digging up our cities and thinking, what was wrong with these people?
Yeah. I think they would think, why haven't you progressed? Why are you still green? Why are you still cycling through the same things?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just to interrupt a bit there, the problem is it comes down probably to human nature. Like, humans have never learnt from their mistakes. Discussion, we're having, it's literally 15,000 years ago. We're learning pretty much the same lessons as those civilizations did, and you think that we'd know better. Having all this technology, having free thought, which is, I guess, very dangerous in their times, and is still very dangerous in this time if you believe our politicians and everything, and the media and everything else. But unfortunately, that's how it is. Humans have not really learnt anything. Like with Spiro's comment about how there's a lot of right-wing governments. I mean, it's scary. It reminds me of, I wasn't around, none of the 3 of us in this room were alive around in the 30s, but it's from what we've read in history books, watched on TV, seen on, been passed on by our grandparents. It's what pretty much was happening in Germany, when Hitler came to power. It's scary. With how people just doesn't. It's still in recent memory that such a horrific event like World War II's happened, and people just haven't learnt from it. I mean, how much more does the world need to be, I guess, destroyed or changed for people to not make those same mistakes?
Yep. To go back to the ancient civilization, the cultures, I think the difference now is that obviously back then the reach of these cultures was smaller. Now everything's global. Everything, all news is global. There was something I read, I think it was one of Graham Hancock's books, where he was saying the subterranean landmass under the Antarctic. Only recently we've been able to map that landmass through various tools. But there was a map drawn up by, I think it was like a Turkish admiral or something like that. And what he said was he actually, with the landmass of Antarctic below it, and they said they mapped it against that, but they compared it against that one, and said actually it was very similar. But he said he managed to collate that map through older maps that was in the Library of Alexandria. So again, it's coming back to, we're talking about humans with amnesia, but I like Graham Hancock's analogy where, we're a civilization with amnesia, because I definitely think the human race is older than we believe it is. I think it's evolved several times, maybe different strands, but basically, essentially, it's evolved. We're in a technological evolution right now. Maybe the civilization prior, remnants of that had evolved in slightly different ways. But I think fundamentally the principles of things like physics and astrological alignment, stuff like that, they knew. And you start to see that more and more, like the likes of Göbekli Tepe. Even places up in Scapa Flow in north of Scotland are a lot older than Stonehenge. So as time goes on, there's evidence that civilizations are definitely older. It's not mainstream because obviously it has to be ratified, which is fine. But over time, we are starting to see those threads of older civilizations. Probably better analogy, the fingerprints of those civilizations coming through.
The map you're referring to is the Piri-Reis map. Yes, it's a map compiled in 1513, and it shows a western landmass, which is potentially Antarctica, which is interesting. It's combined from a whole bunch of other maps. That's people travel to say that we didn't. it's clearly people have been traveling the seas and traveling around Earth forever.